Believe it or not, I did not. That wasn't the order of the hour. But I hope in the years, literally the years I've preached from the book of Psalms, you've learned the importance of the book of Psalms. It is the book of human experience. This is where you see faith in action. You see it moving, living. And there are New Testament truths that are tucked away to be seen in the book of Psalms, and quite often Bible truths that are stated in the New Testament and shown how they come to pass. So to spend times in the book of Psalms is never wasted. And tonight, when we look at Psalm number 61, what I want you to watch for and consider is the peace and protection of God's presence. Now, when He sent the church out under the commission to go into all the world and preach the gospel, as it's given in Matthew 28, He ends that commission by saying, "And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world." And the idea is unto the end of the age, literally till your commission is fulfilled. He will be with us. And it's a blessing to know that He comes around us and His presence protects us. And as the children of Israel left Egypt, He was in that pillar of cloud and fire between them and their enemies always. His presence was there. One passage is so clear about it that it says He looked at Pharaoh from within that fire. He was looking at Pharaoh, watching him. And know and be assured that when we're in the will of God, He's with us. And if we find ourselves out of the will of God, mercifully, He overshadows us. But now, this psalm, David wrote this psalm, and he's on the run. And of all things, he's on the run from his own son. And what's in the back of David's mind as he's on the run from his own son, a lot of the problem's his own fault. A lot of the problem in this psalm stems from his sin with Bathsheba, then setting her husband up to be killed and trying to perform a cover-up. And his son Absalom is a young man by then, maybe older than just a young man. And he's watching all this transpire, and he's watching how his father manipulates things, and he's now biding his time to make his move. He wants the power. And so David now is on the run, and this psalm is dedicated to Jeduthun. Now, he's not mentioned in this psalm, but he's also known as Ethan. Ethan, one of the three primary worship leaders of the tabernacle at that time. And he's of great value, Ethan is. Our Ethan and the Ethan in this that's in the background of this passage that was to take this psalm and give it to the people, teach it to the people. And we should know from this psalm that wherever we find ourselves as children of God, whatever the situation may be, He's with us. Now, what we're going to have to know and realize about this psalm is we have access to the presence of God beyond what David did. And he's going to point out where he wanted to be, what he wanted from the place where he wanted to be, the blessing and the benefit of it. But let's work our way up to it. Verse 1 says, "Hear my cry, O God, attend unto my prayer." Do you ever pray when it doesn't matter whether God hears you or not? If that's the way we pray, we're not really praying. Anytime we go before Him, we should understand the weight of that privilege and that situation. And David is literally praying to be heard. He said, "Hear my cry, O God, attend unto my prayer. From the end of the earth will I cry unto Thee. My heart is overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I, for thou hast been a shelter for me and a strong tower from the enemy. Now, this has special blessing to me right now because I truly feel like I've been to the end of the earth. But I had to admit to them, and I can't remember if I told you any time during the years, but in my preaching life, even when we lived in Belgium, I wanted to have the privilege to go on into Eastern Europe because that was truly enemy territory. God granted that. And I've always wanted to go to the East. And I've learned in research we're not supposed to call it the Orient anymore. The Orient is oppressive, and it talks about the days of colonization. Now, they didn't tell me that. I read that on Google. But I've always had the opportunity to go to the East, to go to Asia. And I've been there now. I've been blessed to be there. But it truly felt like the ends of the earth. David, according to what I was reading this afternoon, is probably at most 3 days away from home. Now, in that day, that if you were to put the mileage down, even though it was 3 days, he wasn't that far from home. But to him, he was at the ends of the earth. But he wanted to be back home. Now, what he was keying on was that's where God's house was, that tabernacle. He wanted to get back close to that tabernacle. And in a moment, I'm going to share a special point about that I read. I want to share it with you. But in the meantime, David finds himself overwhelmed. Now, the Belgians have an expression, or Dutch speakers have an expression for that they talk about everything has gone to the point that it's over them now. It's above them. It's beyond them. They have no more control over it. They can't affect it anymore. And in fact, that's what our English word says, overwhelmed. I'm just so pressed I can't do anything about it. Now, we need to understand when we come to that point. Now, many of us are fixers. There are some things we just cannot fix. And we have to understand that. A good example of that is where I was preaching from the other week when Abraham was crying out for Lot's deliverance because Lot was so engulfed in Sodom. Now, I don't believe he had become a Sodomite, but he lived there. He enjoyed the pomp and the pride and the power of being one who would sit in the gate. He was a recognized man in the city. He had worked his way up, but he had found himself at a place that he could not get free from. The book of 2 Peter said he had vexed his righteous soul. And vexation talks about something you can't deliver yourself from. Somebody on the outside will have to affect your release. And David says, I am now overwhelmed. And he said, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And it's okay. It's good when we realize spiritually that we're at a place that we need somebody to take our hand and, so to speak, bring us back to Jesus. Not that we need to be saved again, but we need to be where we're supposed to be. And he said, would you just help me get to the rock? And so then he says, because that rock, the Lord himself, has been a shelter for me, and not only a shelter, but a strong tower from the enemy. Now, back then, they didn't have radar and radar surveillance and drones buzzing around and everything. But now, if they had a tower that they could get up in and look out and look down, they could see the enemy. I was watching a thing about the Great Wall of China one day. And did you know, as you look out that Great Wall, ever so often, there's like a fortress on top of the wall. They could see from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And if there was a problem, they'd light a fire. They could signal. Now this tower in David's world got them up to where they could look out over the plains or off the mountain or around. They could see movement. And he said, the Lord's been my tower, because there's nothing that escapes his sight. He sees everything. And then he says that he's been a shelter for me. And then he goes to verse 4 and he narrows it down to point out what it is and where it is that all this is rooted. He said, I will abide in thy tabernacle forever. Now the word abide is going to come up, at least I believe it's twice, here at verse 4, then down at verse 7. But in verse 4, the idea of abiding is, I want to spend the night there. Now something you've got to realize, even though David was the king, he was not permitted to go into the tabernacle. He was not a priest. He was not a Levite. And he certainly was not allowed to go into the holiest of all. Even among the priests, only the high priest could go there. And he could only go there once a year. But David said, oh Lord, I'm in such deep trouble. And it's been my own doings that's brought me here. Oh Lord, would you have mercy on me and just let me spend the night at the house you pitched here on earth. The idea is literally, let me sleep in your tent tonight. And then notice that he makes it very clear. He said, I will abide in thy tabernacle. I will trust in the covert of thy wings. Now the covering of the wings here goes far beyond how a mother hen will put her little biddies under her and don't you try to reach under there and touch one. David is picturing what David has been taught. That inside that most holy place, there is a mercy seat. And on that mercy seat, and think about this. David only knows this because he's been taught this. He knows that inside there are cherubims looking at one another, and that two of their wings are extending out over above the seat of that box, that mercy seat. That's the covering he's after. Because he knows under that covering, on that mercy seat, the presence of God is abiding there for Israel. Think about that for a moment. Let that sink in. He said, Lord, if I could just get there, and if I could just spend the night there, I know I will be safe. Now think about that for a moment, and hold your place and look at two other Psalms with me. Look at Psalm 27 and verse 5. Now there's peace to be found there, but there's literally also protection to be found in the presence of the Lord. Psalm 27, and look at verse number 5 and listen to what the Word of God says to us. For in time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock. In the secret, the very secret place of his tabernacle that only one is allowed to go to once a year, there's where he will hide me. And by the way, and this may be something else David was taught. Also, the king in Israel, he was required to make his own handwritten copy of the law of God. So between listening and writing himself, he knows something about this place. On that high priest, when he walked into that holy place, he had on a breastplate. And on the breastplate were beautiful stones. And on each one of those stones was the names of one of the tribes of Israel. So when he walked in there, he brought them in there. He represented them in there. David knew when that high priest went in there and that Judah stone went in there, David went in there. Because Judah was being represented. Now, I'll just say this as we go, as the Lord brings it to mind. Did you know when Jesus Christ walked into the presence of God, He carried your name on His breastplate? He represents you personally before God. He said, He will take me and He will set me up upon a rock, and He shall hide me there in that secret place. Look at Psalm 31 and verse number 20. Psalm 31 and verse number 20. Thou shalt hide them in the secret of thy presence from the pride of man. That's the first thing He'll hide us from. And thou shalt keep them secretly in a pavilion from the strife of tongues. Did you know during this time there's a man that had come out when he knew David was passing through, and he cursed him. And he threw stones at him. And he said, you're to blame for all the trouble that's come in Israel. And one of David's mighty and faithful men stepped up beside the king and said, shall I go take off his head? I mean, they were that ready and that quick to defend him. He said, no. Because David knew the curse was true. It's his fault. He had opened up an occasion for the enemies of God to blaspheme. He had brought the sword down on his own house. And he, knowing that, even though he was just 3 days away, he said, if I can just get back there, if he will just let me spend the night in his tent, everything will be okay. I can make it. We should know that. We should understand that. And then back here in Psalm 61, this represents God's presence, just like He was present, moving with them in that pillar of cloud and fire. Now that there's a stationary place, even though it's not yet the fixed temple, it's the tabernacle. They know He's in there. They've never seen Him in there, but they know He's in there. They believe He's in there. They know when the high priest walks in there with that breastplate on, he's taking them in there. And they know God is their all in all. Now let's move to the New Testament. As with the old, the presence was there. As with the old, it was a place of propitiation. Because that high priest would go in there once a year and put blood on that mercy seat. And that, I've wrestled with this word. I just cannot find a word I'm satisfied with to express this. I'll just say it this way. When that blood was placed on that mercy seat, therefore, by reason of that propitiation, God continued to have mercy on Israel. And God came to Israel. Well, our counterpart, so to speak, in the New Testament is Christ Himself. He is not only the propitiation, He becomes, as it were, also the place of propitiation. When He entered into the world, the first confession, the first public written confession of the church in 1 Timothy 3 says, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh. Jesus Christ is the fullness of the Godhead bodily. John introduced Him this way. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. The Word became flesh and dwelled among us, and we beheld His glory, the glory as the only begotten of the Father. He was the presence of God moving. Now, he said in 2 Corinthians, what Moses asked for time and again, to see God's face, to see His glory. He said, you can't have that, Moses. But in the New Testament, in 2 Corinthians, he said, we see the glory of God in the face of Christ Jesus. And He's representing us there. And He says in Hebrews, I believe it's 13, He said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I like the literal translation of it in Dutch. It sounds like this. The Lord is me, my helper. It's not just a blanket statement for all believers, but it's one and the other and the other and the other and the other and the other. He is for me, my helper. And it keys off this. I'll never leave you and I'll never forsake you. It's His presence. He'll be present with us and give us peace. He'll be present with us and give us help and hope and protection. And then here in Psalm 61, he adds this. For thou, O God, hast heard my vows. Now there are two things David brings up. Actually, three. He says, thou hast heard my vows. Now, all of what was in David's commitment by vows, I don't know. But he knew them and God knew them. And he talks about his vows in verse 5. Then he talks about the fact that he's going in verse 8 to perform his vows. He's going to carry them out, what he vowed before the Lord. So he brought that up. Well, now we need to understand that we have vows. Whether we've ever made any extras personally, we are under vows. We have commitments. And you can jot this down or you can turn, but jot it down for sure. Make a mark of it in your memory or in your notes. Romans chapter 1, verse 1 says this. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God. Now, as you study this verse, what you're going to find, among other things, is the fact that this expression, separated unto the gospel of God, means literally that the gospel now has set the perimeter of our life. Now, Brother Darius and Brother Tim will catch this real quick. That's one of your first responsibilities, isn't it? When you move in somewhere, you establish a perimeter. Well, Paul says when God saves one by His grace, that moment He set a perimeter. And it's the gospel. We're to understand and know that forever after that, that gospel holds the measurements to everything about us. Who we are, what we're allowed, it's all within that measurement. And that became so true and so real to Paul that the gospel of God, you will find it in other places. Paul refers to it as my gospel. Because the gospel came to us by solemn trust. We are actually in the perimeter, under the authority, in the power of the gospel. We're supposed to live out our lives and even serve out our servitude here on the earth under the gospel. We better know the gospel. We better understand the gospel because it is our life. And don't become complacently familiar with the gospel, but so well understanding with the gospel that you know it and you have assurance and confidence about it, so much so that you can answer any man about the hope of it, that they might have hope. But David said, I have vows, I need your grace and help. I need your presence and power that I might perform my vows. We need to understand that as well. God didn't set us free to live freely after the flesh. He made us free that we might serve Him. And when this life ends, heaven's not going to be that vacation place that we sometimes imagine. Revelation 22 says, we will be His servants and we shall serve Him. You better get used to the idea of living in a parameter. Being told what to do, when to do, how to do it, how to present yourself, like that uniform code of military justice. We're under it, and it's called the gospel, because one day we're going to give an account for it, and then one day we're going to step into eternity and continue to live under it. He said, my vows, and not only my vows, but verse 5 also says, for thou hast given me the heritage of those that fear thy name. We not only have vows and commitments, but we have an inheritance. Now for Israel, connected to the Abrahamic covenant, it was the land of Canaan. And they've never consistently, for very long, held at all. Now, the New Testament counterpart is Christ in His fullness. And He wants to fill us to the full with the fullness of Christ. So much so that Paul says in Colossians 2, he says, I labor, and that word labor there means I labor to the point of exhaustion. And he says, in essence, I can do it because of that fullness. There was a couple of times, literally, at least 2 times I'm thinking of, I was so tired. I was so tired. And it was time to preach. And if there's ever a time you need all your wits about you and all the strength you can have, it's then. And I had none. And I said, Lord, you're going to have to help me here. You're going to have to be with me. And those 2 times in particular, I preached with more power and was able to handle more resources and give them than in the other occasions. Because at that moment, it was totally fullness that was working. Wasn't me. Wasn't your prayers. Wasn't their prayers. It was His presence and His fullness. Because I had nothing left, and He gave it. Paul goes on to testify that even if we're called on to suffer persecution, we'll be able to because of the fullness. That's our inheritance. Ephesians 3, we've read it so many times in the last year. The height, the depth, the breadth, the length, to know Christ by faith. Well, we know Him. We got saved. No. We got born again. Now we're really beginning to know Him. And the better we know Him, the more we know Him, the better we understand the fullness, the more we can accept it, and the more we can live in it. That's our inheritance. Then he talks about God preserving His life in verse 6, and He does. I told Catherine, I think I've told Linda, in essence I've told Linda if she's really listening. Honestly, I was experiencing things so real and was being so cared for and so blessed, I thought surely that was my swan song. If you understand a swan song, that's your last opportunity to do anything. And I just reconciled to the fact I was either going to die there or come home and die. I thought that was it. It couldn't get any better than this. Nothing beyond this. But at the same time, just as soon as I made it all the way to the ground in Chattanooga, tears welled up my eyes, and I said, thank you, Lord, you let me come all the way home. I snuck up on them. They were sitting down when I came through the doors, and when Linda saw me and I saw Linda, she jumped up and she grabbed me like she'd never let me go again. He took me and He brought me back. He prolonged my life. I don't know how many times I may have been looking right at danger and didn't know it. Now, don't take a deep breath because I was 10,000 miles away about what I just said. I don't know how many times He prolonged my life today. You don't know how many times He prolonged your life and my life this evening. But He's doing it. And then He goes on to say, at verse 7, He shall abide before God forever. He shifted now into talking about Himself as the King. Oh, prepare mercy and truth which may preserve Him. So, verse 8, will I sing praise unto Thy name forever, that I may daily perform my vows. Now the word abide here is not just spend the night in His tent. But now at verse 7, it's forever. It truly is forever now. And do you realize that? We are under that already. But one day we will not only be under it, but we'll look at Him. And not only will He guide us by His Spirit, but we'll be able to look at Him, literally see Him in His house as He issues our vows for the day, what we're supposed to do that day in eternity. And did you know, you got to get this, we think about those mansions as detached dwellings because, we think about Beverly Hills. But there's a key thought you're missing if that's what you think. Those mansions are in the Father's house. What David asked for, dreamed of, and hoped for, even longed for, just to get to spend the night in his tent, is going to be the truth in our long home. We're going to stay forever in His house. And by the way, in heaven there will be no nights. It's always day there, and there will be no sun or moon, no need of them, because the Lamb Himself is the light. So tonight, the peace